I was standing in my garage at 3 in the afternoon on a Friday when I noticed the pressure gauge on my main propane distribution panel had dropped by 40% in the last 2 hours, which made absolutely no sense since I wasn't running anything that would consume that much gas. My name is Stephen Erikson, and I own what most people would consider an unusual property in Scottsdale, Arizona. The house itself sits on 5 acres at the end of Copper Ridge Drive, a gated community called Desert Heights that some developer thought would be the next big thing back in 2018. What makes my property unique is that when the original developer went bankrupt, I bought not just my lot, but also the utility easements and infrastructure that were supposed to service the entire northern section of the development. That includes the propane distribution system that was meant to supply 12 homes, but currently only services mine and the community center building. The community center was this massive stucco monstrosity that the HOA had taken over after the bankruptcy, using it for their monthly meetings and the occasional neighborhood event. I had a contract with them where they paid me monthly for their propane usage, usually around 50 gallons per month for their water heaters and the kitchen range. Nothing that would cause a 40% drop in 2 hours. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the monitoring app I had installed last year. The system was pretty sophisticated, something I had upgraded when I realized I was essentially running a small utility company. I could see in real time which distribution points were active and how much gas was flowing through each line. According to the readout, the community center was pulling an enormous amount of propane, way more than their water heaters and range could possibly use. I walked out of my garage and looked down the hill toward the community center. From my elevated position, I could see the parking lot was full of cars, and there was a large white tent set up on the lawn. Music was drifting up the hill, some kind of acoustic guitar version of a Bruno Mars song. The HOA was having a party. That was fine. They were allowed to do that. What wasn't fine was that I hadn't approved any additional propane usage, and based on what I was seeing on my monitoring system, they had hooked something up to my supply line without permission. I got in my truck and drove down the winding road to the community center. It took about 3 minutes to get there, and when I pulled into the parking lot, I could see exactly what they had done. Under the white tent, there were 6 massive outdoor heaters running full blast. The kind that restaurants use on their patios, tall propane tower heaters that could burn through a tank in a few hours. But they hadn't connected them to portable tanks. Someone had run a manifold line directly from the community center's supply connection, which meant they were pulling from my main distribution system. I parked my truck and walked toward the tent. There were maybe 50 people milling around, holding glasses of wine and plates of catered food. I recognized most of them as residents of Desert Heights. At the center of everything, holding court near a table laden with cheese and crackers, was Brenda Patterson, the HOA president. Brenda was exactly what you would picture when someone said, HOA president. She was 53 years old, had that specific haircut that somehow every woman in her position seemed to have, shoulder length with blonde highlights that looked professionally maintained. She wore white capri pants and a turquoise blouse that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. She had a wine glass in one hand and was laughing loudly at something another woman had said. I walked up to her and waited for a break in the conversation. When she finally noticed me, her smile faltered just slightly. "Stephen," she said, drawing out my name. "I didn't realize you were coming to the spring social." "I wasn't invited," I said, "but I did notice that my propane system is currently being drained at an alarming rate. You want to explain why you've got 6 heaters running off my supply line?" Her expression shifted from surprise to mild annoyance. "Oh, that. Well, the rental company said we needed a hardline connection for the heaters to run all evening. It's much more cost-effective than using individual tanks." "Cost-effective for you," I said. "But you didn't ask permission, and you definitely didn't arrange to pay for the gas you're using." Brenda waved her hand dismissively. "Stephen, don't be ridiculous. We already pay you for propane every month. This is just part of our normal usage." "Your normal usage is about 50 gallons a month," I said. "Those heaters are going to burn through 100 gallons in an afternoon. That's not covered under our agreement." Several people nearby had stopped their conversations to listen. Brenda's face was starting to flush, which I had learned over the past few years was usually a sign that she was about to escalate rather than back down. "Our agreement," she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge, "is that we have access to propane for the community center. These heaters are for a community center event, therefore they're covered." "That's not how this works," I said. "You need to shut those heaters down or you need to pay for the propane you're using. Those are your options." Brenda set her wine glass down on the nearest table with more force than necessary. "You know what your problem is, Stephen. You think that just because you own some pipes in the ground, you can dictate what this community does. We have rights. We have a lease agreement for this building, and that includes utilities. Your lease agreement specifies normal residential usage," I said. "This isn't that. I'm not going to ruin this event because you want to nickel and dime us over a few dollars of propane," Brenda said. Several other people were nodding along with her now, including Marcus Webb, the vice president of the HOA board, and Patricia something. I couldn't remember her last name, but she was always at these meetings. I pulled out my phone and opened the app again. "Okay," I said. "Then I'm going to shut off your supply until we can come to an agreement about payment." Brenda's eyes widened. "You can't do that." "I absolutely can," I said. "It's my propane system. You're welcome to hook these heaters up to your own tanks if you want to keep using them." I tapped the screen, pulling up the control interface. The system was set up with remote shut-off valves at each distribution point, originally installed as a safety feature, but also useful for situations exactly like this. My finger hovered over the button that would close the valve to the community center. "Stephen, I'm warning you," Brenda said, her voice rising. "If you disrupt this event, there will be consequences." "I'm not disrupting anything," I said. "I'm just declining to provide free propane for your party." I hit the button. On my screen, I watched the valve status change from open to closed. About 30 seconds later, the flames in the 6 heaters began to flicker and die. People under the tent started looking around in confusion. Brenda's face went from flushed to bright red. "You absolute child," she hissed. "Do you have any idea how much we spent on this event? We have members who are cold. We have catering that's being affected by the temperature drop." "Then you should have asked permission before tapping into my system," I said. "This isn't over," Brenda said. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and we're going to discuss your hostile behavior toward this community." "Looking forward to it," I said, and walked back to my truck. I could hear Brenda behind me, already rallying the troops, explaining to everyone that I was being unreasonable and that the board would handle it. Several people were shooting me dirty looks as I drove away. Back at my house, I checked the monitoring system again. The flow to the community center had stopped completely, which was good. My overall pressure was returning to normal. I made a note in my records about the incident, including screenshots of the usage spike and the timeline of events. The thing about living in an HOA community is that everything becomes a political game. I had learned this the hard way over the past few years. When I first moved in, I thought the HOA would be a minor annoyance, something I would have to deal with occasionally but nothing major. I was wrong. Brenda Patterson had been elected HOA president 3 years ago, and in that time, she had transformed the organization from a sleepy group that met quarterly to discuss landscaping into something that resembled a small, authoritarian government. She had opinions about everything: what color you could paint your front door, what kind of mailbox you could have, where you could park your vehicles, what time of day you could run your lawnmower. I had mostly stayed out of her way, but we had clashed a few times. Once over a trailer I had parked in my driveway for a weekend, which she said violated the HOA covenants. Another time over some solar panels I had installed, which she claimed were not the approved style. Each time I had pushed back, and each time she had eventually backed down because my property and the easements I owned gave me more leverage than a typical homeowner. But this felt different. This felt like she was going to make it personal. Sure enough, on Monday morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Desert Heights HOA, informing me that there would be an emergency board meeting on Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, and that the primary agenda item would be discussing my violation of community standards and hostile interference with approved HOA activities. The letter was signed by Brenda Patterson, with copies to the other 4 board members: Marcus Webb, Patricia Morrison, Leonard Chen, and Rita Kowalski. I called my lawyer, a guy named Frank Garrison who had helped me with the property purchase and the utility easement issues. His office was in downtown Scottsdale, and I drove over that afternoon to talk to him in person. Frank was in his early 60s, with gray hair and a perpetually skeptical expression that I had always found reassuring. He listened while I explained what had happened at the spring social, then pulled out the original easement documents and the contract I had with the HOA for propane service. "They don't have a case," Frank said after reviewing everything. "Your contract with them is explicit about usage rates and approval for anything outside normal parameters. They violated the agreement, not you." "So, what do I do about this meeting?" I asked. "Go to it," Frank said. "Let them make their case, then explain why they're wrong. If they try to fine you or take any action, we'll respond with a formal letter explaining why they are in breach of contract. And if they want to push it further, we can go to arbitration or court, but I don't think it'll come to that." "You don't know Brenda," I said. Frank smiled. "I've dealt with a lot of HOA boards, Stephen. They're usually more bark than bite. The problem is that people don't push back, so the board members start to think they have more power than they actually do. Stand your ground, reference the contract, and don't let them intimidate you." Wednesday evening arrived, and I drove down to the community center for the meeting. The parking lot was packed, which was unusual for an HOA meeting. Normally, these things drew maybe a dozen people, mostly the board members and a few busybodies who liked to keep tabs on neighborhood drama. Tonight, there had to be 40 or 50 cars. Inside, the main meeting room was set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Brenda was in the center, with Marcus Webb and Patricia Morrison on her right, and Leonard Chen and Rita Kowalski on her left. Every seat in the room was full, with people standing along the back wall. I found a spot near the side and waited for the meeting to start. Right at 7, Brenda banged a gavel on the table, which I was pretty sure she had bought specifically for moments like this, because I had never seen an HOA president use a gavel before. "This emergency meeting of the Desert Heights Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced. "The primary agenda item tonight is to address the actions of Stephen Erikson, who deliberately sabotaged our spring social event last Friday by cutting off propane service to the community center without warning or justification. There was some murmuring from the crowd. I noticed a lot of people looking back at me. Mr. Erikson, Brenda continued, has shown a pattern of disregard for community standards and a hostile attitude toward this board and its activities. Tonight, we will be discussing appropriate consequences for his behavior, up to and including fines and potential legal action. Marcus Webb leaned forward. I'd like to add that Mr. Erikson's actions directly resulted in financial losses for the HOA. We had to refund several attendees who left early due to the cold, and our catering costs were affected. How much are we talking about? Someone in the crowd asked. Approximately $800, Patricia Morrison said, reading from a paper in front of her. Brenda nodded. We will be seeking reimbursement from Mr. Erikson for those losses, in addition to a formal apology and a guarantee that he will not interfere with future HOA events. I'd like to speak, I said, standing up. Brenda gave me a look that could freeze water. You'll have a chance during the comment period. When is that? I asked. After we've presented all the facts, she said. I think the facts need some context, I said. Can I provide that now, or do I need to wait? There was some whispering among the board members. Finally, Leonard Chen, who I had always thought was one of the more reasonable people on the board, spoke up. I think we should hear from Mr. Erikson now, he said. That's only fair. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but Rita Kowalski was nodding too, so she waved her hand in a gesture of reluctant permission. I walked to the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. Here's what actually happened on Friday, I said. The HOA connected 6 industrial propane heaters to my distribution system without asking permission and without arranging payment. Those heaters were burning through propane at about 20 times the normal rate for the community center. When I discovered this, I went down to the spring social and explained the situation to Mrs. Patterson. I offered 2 solutions, either shut down the heaters or arrange to pay for the propane being used. She refused both options and told me that the HOA had the right to use as much propane as they wanted under our existing agreement. I pulled out my phone and brought up the contract. Our agreement, which I have here, specifically states that the HOA will pay for propane based on metered usage, and that any usage exceeding normal residential parameters requires advance approval and additional payment. The HOA violated that agreement, not me. When they refused to comply, I exercised my right as the owner of the propane distribution system to discontinue service. You embarrassed us in front of the entire community, Brenda said. I protected my property rights, I said. If you wanted to use that much propane, you should have asked first. Or you should have rented tanks from a propane company like everyone else does for outdoor events. We shouldn't have to rent tanks, Marcus Webb said. We have a propane connection right there. Which you pay for based on normal usage, I said. Do you think the electric company would let you run a concert without charging extra for the power? Do you think the water company would let you fill a swimming pool for free just because you already have a water connection? That's completely different, Brenda said. It's exactly the same, I said. You're treating my propane system like it's a public utility that you can use however you want. It's not. It's privately owned, and you have a specific contract that defines how you can use it. The contract is clearly inadequate if it doesn't cover community events, Patricia Morrison said. Then we can renegotiate the contract, I said. I'm happy to discuss new terms. What I'm not happy about is you unilaterally deciding that the current terms don't matter. Leonard Chen spoke up again. Did the HOA actually ask Mr. Erikson about using additional propane for the event? There was a long pause. Brenda shifted in her seat. "We didn't think we needed to," she finally said. "It was for a community event." "But you didn't ask," Leonard pressed. "No," Brenda admitted. "Then I don't see how we can claim Mr. Erikson was in the wrong," Leonard said. "If we didn't ask permission to use his property in a way that exceeded our agreement, then he had every right to cut us off. Are you seriously taking his side?" Brenda asked, her voice sharp. "I'm not taking sides," Leonard said. "I'm looking at the facts. We should have asked. We didn't. That's our mistake, not his." Rita Kowalski was nodding slowly. "I have to agree," she said. "I wasn't aware that we were using Mr. Erikson's propane for the heaters. I thought we had rented tanks." "The rental company recommended a hardline connection," Marcus Webb said. "It was more efficient." "More efficient for them, maybe," I said, "but nobody asked me about it." There was more murmuring in the crowd now, and I could tell the mood was shifting. People were starting to realize that maybe the board had overstepped. Brenda was clearly sensing this too, because she banged her gavel again. Regardless of the technical details, Mr. Erikson's behavior was hostile and disruptive. He could have handled this more diplomatically. "I tried to," I said. "I came down to the party, I explained the situation, I offered solutions. You were the one who refused to compromise." "Because your demands were unreasonable," Brenda said. "My demands were to either stop using my propane without permission or pay for what you were using," I said. "How is that unreasonable?" Someone in the crowd spoke up. "How much propane did they actually use?" I checked my phone. "Based on the monitoring data, about 90 gallons in the 2 hours before I shut off the valve." "What's that cost?" the same person asked. "Propane is running about $3 a gallon right now," I said. "So around $270. "You shut down our event over $270? Brenda asked, her voice incredulous. "No," I said. "I shut down your unauthorized use of my property. The dollar amount is irrelevant. You don't get to help yourself to other people's things just because it's convenient for you." "This is absurd," Brenda said. She turned to address the crowd. "Does everyone here understand what Mr. Erikson is saying? He's saying that he can hold the HOA hostage anytime he wants by threatening to cut off our propane. He's saying that we serve at his pleasure, that our ability to function as a community depends on his goodwill." "That's not what I'm saying at all," I said. "I'm saying follow the contract we agreed to. That's it." "The contract gives you too much power," Marcus Webb said. "Then you shouldn't have signed it," I said. "But you did, and now you have to live with the terms. Just like I have to live with the HOA covenants, even though I think half of them are ridiculous." That got a few chuckles from the crowd, which clearly annoyed Brenda even more. She stood up, placing both hands on the table in front of her. "I'm calling for a vote," she said. "The board will decide whether to fine Mr. Erikson for his behavior and pursue legal action to modify our propane service agreement. All in favor?" Marcus Webb and Patricia Morrison both raised their hands. Leonard Chen and Rita Kowalski did not. "The motion fails," Leonard said. 2-2. Brenda looked like she had just been slapped. "We need to resolve this," she said. "We can resolve it by apologizing to Mr. Erikson and asking him if he would be willing to discuss a revised agreement that covers special events," Rita Kowalski said. "I'm not apologizing to him," Brenda said. "Then we're at an impasse," Leonard said. He turned to me. "Mr. Erikson, would you be willing to meet with me and Rita to discuss potential modifications to the service agreement?" "Sure," I said. "As long as we're talking about reasonable terms and fair compensation." "That sounds acceptable," Leonard said. Brenda sat back down, her arms crossed. "This meeting is adjourned," she said, not bothering with the gavel this time. People started filing out and several of them stopped to talk to me. Most were curious about the propane system and how it worked. A few thanked me for standing up to the board. One guy, a retired engineer named Bill something, told me that he had been fighting with Brenda for 2 years over a fence dispute, and that he appreciated seeing someone else push back successfully. Leonard Chen and Rita Kowalski came over after most of the crowd had left. We agreed to meet the following Tuesday at Leonard's house to discuss a possible addendum to the service agreement. I drove home feeling like I had won, but also knowing that Brenda Patterson was not the type to let something like this go. She had been publicly embarrassed, her board was divided, and I was the cause of all of it. This was going to get worse before it got better. Tuesday arrived, and I met with Leonard and Rita at Leonard's house, which was about halfway between my property and the community center. Leonard was a retired software developer who had moved to Scottsdale 5 years ago. Rita was a former teacher, sharp and practical in a way that I appreciated. We sat at Leonard's kitchen table, and he pulled out a notepad. "Here's what I'm thinking," he said. "We create an addendum to the existing service agreement that establishes a special events rate. The HOA can request additional propane usage with 72 hours notice, and you provide a quote based on estimated consumption. If the HOA approves the quote, then you provide the service. If there's a disagreement, we have a neutral arbitration process." "That works for me," I said. "What about emergency situations?" "Like what?" Rita asked. "Like if the community center's water heater fails in the middle of winter, and they need to bring in a temporary high-capacity unit that uses more propane than normal," I said. "I don't want them to have to wait 3 days for approval in a genuine emergency." "Good point," Leonard said. "We can add an emergency provision. Something like you can authorize emergency additional usage at your discretion, and the HOA agrees to pay within 30 days based on metered consumption." We spent about an hour hammering out the details, and by the end, we had a document that seemed fair to everyone. Leonard said he would type it up and send it to me for review, then present it to the full board at the next regular meeting. "You think Brenda will go for this?" I asked. Leonard and Rita exchanged a look. "Probably not," Rita said, "but she only needs one more vote to be overruled. Marcus and Patricia usually follow her lead, but if we can get one of them to see reason, we can pass it." "Why do Marcus and Patricia always back her up?" I asked. "Marcus has been friends with Brenda for years," Leonard said. "They moved to the neighborhood around the same time. Patricia, I think she just doesn't like conflict and goes along with whoever seems most confident. So we need to make Patricia see that the addendum is reasonable," I said. "Exactly," Rita said. "Over the next week, I didn't hear anything from the HOA, which I took as a good sign. Leonard sent me the typed-up addendum, and I reviewed it with Frank Garrison, who said it looked solid. I sent back my approval, and Leonard said he would put it on the agenda for the next board meeting, which was scheduled for the following Monday. Then, on Friday afternoon, I got a phone call from my propane supplier in Phoenix. I had an account with Southwest Gas Supply, the company that filled my main storage tanks every month. "Mr. Erikson, this is Dana from Southwest Gas," the woman on the phone said. "I'm calling because we received a request to terminate your account." "What?" I said. "From who?" "The request came from the Desert Heights HOA," Dana said. "They claim that they're taking over the propane distribution system for the community and that your services are no longer needed." "That's not true," I said. "I own the distribution system. They have no authority to cancel my account." "I figured something was off," Dana said. "That's why I'm calling you. The request came through email from a Brenda Patterson, who said she was the HOA president and property manager for the community center. She's the HOA president, but she doesn't manage my property," I said. Please ignore that request. My account should remain active. Will do, Dana said. I'll make a note in your file, but you might want to follow up with the HOA about this. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen trying to figure out what Brenda was playing at. She had tried to cancel my propane supply account, which would have left me unable to refill my storage tanks. If that had worked, eventually my system would have run dry, and I would have had no propane to distribute to anyone, including the community center. It was a bold move and a stupid one. She had no legal authority to cancel my account, and Southwest Gas had been smart enough to verify before taking action. But it showed that Brenda was willing to escalate this fight in ways I hadn't anticipated. I called Frank Erikson and explained what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "That might be fraud." "What do you mean?" I asked. "She impersonated someone with authority over your account in order to interfere with your business relationship," Frank said. "Depending on how she worded the request, that could be considered fraud or identity theft. At minimum, it's interference with a business contract." "What should I do?" I asked. "Get a copy of the email she sent to Southwest Gas," Frank said. "Then we'll send her a formal letter explaining that any further attempts to interfere with your property or business relationships will result in legal action. That should get her attention." I called Dana back at Southwest Gas and asked if she could forward me the email from Brenda. She said she would check with her supervisor, then called me back an hour later to say they could provide it as part of a records request. I filled out the online form, and by Monday morning, I had a PDF of the email in my inbox. The email was remarkable in its audacity. Brenda had written that the Desert Heights HOA was consolidating utility management services, and that my account should be transferred to the HOA's name. She had included the community center's address and said that all future deliveries should be billed to the HOA. I forwarded the email to Frank, who called me back within an hour. "This is even better than I thought," Frank said. "She's not just trying to cancel your account, she's trying to steal it. She wants Southwest Gas to start delivering propane to your system but billing it to the HOA. That would give them control of the supply without having to deal with you at all." "Can she do that?" I asked. "No," Frank said, "but it shows intent. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter that we'll send to her and to the HOA board. If she continues this behavior, we'll have grounds for a lawsuit and possibly criminal charges." That night was the regular HOA board meeting. I arrived early and took a seat in the front row. The room was less crowded than the emergency meeting had been, maybe 20 people total. Leonard Chen saw me and gave a small nod. Brenda started the meeting right at 7, going through the usual routine of approving the previous meeting's minutes and discussing routine business like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance. Then they got to new business, and Leonard brought up the proposed addendum to my propane service agreement. He explained the terms clearly and logically, emphasizing that it would provide a clear framework for special events and prevent misunderstandings in the future. When he finished, he asked for questions. Marcus Webb spoke first. "I still think this gives Mr. Erikson too much power over HOA activities. We should be exploring alternative propane suppliers who can provide more reliable service." "We have a 20-year easement agreement with Mr. Erikson," Rita Kowalski said. "Finding an alternative supplier would mean building an entirely new distribution system, which would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. This addendum is a reasonable compromise." "I agree," Leonard said. "We're not going to find a better solution." Patricia Morrison looked uncertain. "What if Mr. Erikson refuses to provide propane for an event? Do we have any recourse?" "The addendum includes an arbitration clause," Leonard said. If there's a dispute, a neutral third party would review the situation and make a binding decision. That seems fair, Patricia said slowly. I could see Brenda getting more agitated as the conversation went on. Finally, she interrupted. This is all irrelevant, she said. I've been in contact with Southwest Gas Supply, and they've agreed to provide direct service to the community center, bypassing Mr. Erikson's system entirely. Leonard frowned. How would that work? The community center is connected to Mr. Erikson's distribution system. We can install a separate tank and run new lines, Brenda said. That would cost a fortune, Rita said. It would be worth it to free ourselves from Mr. Erikson's control, Brenda said. I stood up. Before you go too far down that road, I said, you should know that I own the utility easements for this part of the development. You can't install a new propane system without my permission because it would require running lines through my easement. That can't be right, Marcus Webb said. It is right, I said. You can verify it with the county records. When I bought my property, I also bought the utility easements. It's all documented. Then we'll seek a legal remedy, Brenda said. You can't hold the HOA hostage like this. I'm not holding anyone hostage, I said. I'm offering a fair service agreement with reasonable terms. You're the one trying to find ways around it. I pulled out my phone and brought up the email she had sent to Southwest Gas. In fact, you already tried to steal my propane account by requesting that Southwest Gas transfer it to the HOA's name. There was a collective gasp from the board and the audience. Brenda's face went pale. That's a lie, she said. It's documented, I said. I have the email you sent to Southwest Gas. My attorney has reviewed it, and he's prepared to take legal action if you continue to interfere with my business relationships. Leonard Chen looked shocked. Brenda, is this true? I was exploring options, Brenda said defensively. I wasn't doing anything illegal. You impersonated someone with authority over my account in order to redirect my supplier, I said. That's fraud. You're being dramatic, Brenda said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm being accurate, I said. And I'm giving you fair warning right now, in front of witnesses. If you attempt anything like this again, I will pursue criminal charges in addition to civil action. The room was completely silent. Rita Kowalski finally spoke up. I move that we table the discussion about alternative propane suppliers and vote on Leonard's proposed addendum to the existing service agreement. Second, Leonard said. All in favor? Rita asked. Leonard and Rita raised their hands. Patricia Morrison hesitated, then raised her hand as well. The motion passes 3-2, Rita said. Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake, she said. You're all making a mistake. We're preventing a lawsuit, Leonard said quietly. That's not a mistake. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that. As people filed out, several came up to thank me or express support. Patricia Morrison approached me near the door. I'm sorry about all this, she said. I didn't know Brenda had contacted your supplier. That was out of line. I appreciate you voting for the addendum, I said. It seemed like the reasonable thing to do, she said. And honestly, I'm tired of all the fighting. The HOA is supposed to be about maintaining the community, not waging war with residents. Over the next few weeks, things settled down. Leonard sent me the signed addendum, which Frank reviewed and I countersigned. The HOA requested propane for a small outdoor barbecue event in late June, following the proper procedures this time. I provided a quote, they approved it, and everything went smoothly. I thought maybe the drama was over, but I should have known better. In early July, I got a call from the Maricopa County Code Enforcement Office. A woman named Jessica informed me that they had received a complaint about my property, specifically about the propane storage tanks and distribution system. What kind of complaint? I asked. The complaint alleges that your propane system doesn't meet current safety codes and poses a danger to neighboring properties, Jessica said. I need to schedule an inspection. Who filed the complaint? I asked, though I already knew. The complaint came from the Desert Heights HOA, Jessica said. A Brenda Patterson. Of course it did. When do you want to do the inspection? I asked. How's Thursday morning? Jessica asked. We set an appointment for 10 o'clock. After hanging up, I called Frank Garrison to give him a heads up. Then I called the contractor who had originally installed my propane system, a company called Arizona Propane Solutions. When I explained what was happening, the owner, a guy named Tom Reed, laughed. This is harassment, he said. Your system is absolutely up to code. We pulled all the proper permits when we installed it, and it passed inspection with flying colors. I've got all the documentation. Can you come out for the code enforcement inspection? I asked. I want to make sure we have everything we need to shut this down. I'll be there, Tom said. Thursday morning arrived and Jessica from code enforcement showed up right on time. She was in her 30s, professional and no nonsense. Tom Reed arrived a few minutes later with a large binder full of permits and inspection reports. We walked through the entire system, starting with the main storage tanks in my garage and then following the distribution lines. Jessica took photos and made notes. Tom provided documentation for every component, showing that it met or exceeded current safety standards. After about 90 minutes, Jessica closed her notebook. Mr. Erikson, your system is in full compliance with all applicable codes, she said. There's no violation here. So the complaint was baseless, I asked. The complaint was incorrect, Jessica said carefully. I'll file a report stating that no violations were found. What happens to someone who files false complaints? I asked. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. If it's a one-time thing, nothing. If someone files multiple false complaints, we can pursue charges for misuse of government resources. But that's pretty rare. After Jessica left, Tom and I stood in my driveway talking. You need to document all of this, he said. Every time this HOA lady comes after you, every phone call, every letter, every complaint, if it escalates, you'll need evidence of a pattern of harassment. I've been keeping records, I said. Good, Tom said, because I've seen situations like this before. Some people get it in their head that they're right, and they won't stop until they've destroyed the other person or until they are forced to stop by a court. Tom's words stuck with me. I spent that evening organizing all my documentation into a single folder. The original easement agreements, the propane service contract, the emergency meeting minutes, the email Brenda sent to Southwest Gas, the code enforcement complaint, all of it. I made both physical and digital copies and sent a set to Frank Garrison. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then, in late July, I got a notice in the mail that the HOA was implementing a new special assessment. Every homeowner in Desert Heights would be charged $1,500 to fund infrastructure improvements and legal expenses related to utility disputes. The notice didn't mention me by name, but the implication was clear. The HOA was raising money to fight me. I called Leonard Chen, who said he had voted against the special assessment but had been outvoted 3-2. Brenda convinced Marcus and Patricia that the HOA needs a war chest in case you decide to cut off propane service arbitrarily, Leonard said. I tried to explain that we have the addendum now, that there's a clear process, but Brenda has been working the neighborhood, telling people that you're a threat to the community. Is the special assessment legal? I asked. Probably, Leonard said. The HOA bylaws allow for special assessments with a majority board vote. You could challenge it, but it would cost you more in legal fees than the $1,500. I paid the assessment, but I also sent a letter to the full HOA board with a copy to every homeowner in Desert Heights explaining my position. I laid out the timeline of events, provided copies of the propane service agreement and the addendum, and explained that I had never refused to provide service. I had only insisted on following the agreed-upon terms. The letter generated some response. I got emails and phone calls from several neighbors, most supportive, a few critical. One woman, Jennifer Larkin, who lived 2 streets over, called to tell me that Brenda had been going door to door telling people that I was price gouging the HOA and that I had threatened to cut off propane service to the community center permanently. "That's completely false," I told Jennifer. "I know," she said. "I read your letter. I just thought you should know what Brenda is saying." In August, Brenda tried a different approach. She announced at the monthly HOA meeting that the board was considering a change to the community covenants that would require all utility systems to be turned over to HOA control. Leonard and Rita both objected, pointing out that my utility easements were private property and couldn't be seized by the HOA without my consent or compensation. The measure failed, but it showed that Brenda was still looking for ways to undermine my position. By September, I was exhausted by the whole situation. Every month brought a new attempt by Brenda to either take control of the propane system, discredit me in the community, or create enough legal pressure to force me to give up. Frank Erikson kept telling me that eventually Brenda would run out of options and give up, but I was starting to doubt it. Then, in early October, something happened that changed everything. I was at home on a Tuesday afternoon when I noticed an unusual pattern on my propane monitoring system. The flow to the community center had spiked, similar to what had happened during the spring social. But according to the HOA's event calendar, which was posted on their website, there was no scheduled event that day. I pulled up the detailed monitoring data and saw that the spike had started around noon and had been running for about 3 hours. The flow rate suggested that someone had connected high-capacity appliances to the line, maybe space heaters or something similar. I got in my truck and drove down to the community center. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars I didn't recognize. The building looked quiet from the outside. I walked up to the front door and found it locked, which was unusual for a weekday afternoon when the HOA office was supposed to have hours. I walked around the building to the side where the propane connection was located. There was a window that looked into the storage room, and I cupped my hands against the glass to peer inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. Someone had set up what looked like a small manufacturing operation inside the storage room. There were several tables covered with glass containers, tubes, and burners. A chemical smell was seeping out around the window frame, and standing in the middle of it all, wearing a respirator mask and safety goggles, was Marcus Webb. He was cooking meth in the community center, using my propane. I backed away from the window and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. I need to report a suspected drug lab, I said, at the Desert Heights Community Center on Copper Ridge Drive in Scottsdale. Are you in immediate danger? The operator asked. No, I'm outside the building, I said. But there's someone inside and they're using propane burners with chemicals. It looks like they're manufacturing methamphetamine. The operator took my information and told me to stay clear of the building. Within 10 minutes, I heard sirens. 3 Scottsdale police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, followed by a fire truck. I met the first officer, a young guy with a crew cut whose name tag read Morrison. I explained who I was and what I had seen. He radioed for backup and a hazmat team, then approached the building with two other officers. They pounded on the front door and announced their presence. After a moment, Marcus Webb emerged from the side door, no longer wearing the respirator or goggles. He looked shocked to see the police. "What's going on?" Marcus asked. "We received a report of suspicious activity in this building," Officer Morrison said. "We need to search the premises." "You need a warrant for that," Marcus said. "Not if we have probable cause to believe there's an imminent danger," the officer said. "Drug manufacturing operations can explode. That gives us exigent circumstances." Marcus looked like he was going to argue, but another officer had already moved past him and entered through the side door. A moment later, he came back out and nodded to Officer Morrison. "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest," Morrison said, pulling out his handcuffs. What followed was controlled chaos. The hazmat team arrived and entered the building in full protective gear. The police cordoned off the parking lot and began interviewing me. A detective showed up, a woman in her 40s named Sarah Pritchard, who took my statement in detail. I explained about the propane monitoring system, the unusual spike in usage, and what I had observed through the window. I showed her the monitoring data on my phone, with timestamps that corresponded to the period when Marcus had been inside. "How long has this been going on?" Detective Pritchard asked. "I don't know," I said. "This is the first time I noticed a spike when there wasn't a scheduled event. But looking back at my records, there have been a few other unexplained usage increases over the past few months. I assumed there were small maintenance issues or someone was using the building without updating the calendar." "We're going to need copies of all those records," Pritchard said. I sent her the data files right from my phone. The hazmat team spent 2 hours processing the scene, removing chemicals and equipment. By the time they were done, it was getting dark. Marcus had been taken away in a police cruiser. The community center was sealed with crime scene tape. I drove home in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. Marcus Webb, the vice president of the HOA, had been running a meth lab in the community center, using my propane. For who knows how long, the next morning my phone started ringing early. It was Leonard Chen. "Did you hear?" he asked. "I was there," I said. "I'm the one who called the police." "Oh my God," Leonard said. "I saw the crime scene tape this morning when I drove by. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. Is it true? Was Marcus really cooking meth?" "That's what it looked like to me," I said. "The police will have to confirm it, but yeah, that's what was happening." "This is going to destroy the HOA," Leonard said. "We're going to have to answer for how this happened under our watch." "You didn't know," I said. "But we should have known," Leonard said. "He's on the board. He had a key to the building. How often was he in there? What was he doing?" Over the next few days, more details emerged. The police found evidence that Marcus had been using the community center for meth production for at least 4 months. He had been careful, only cooking when the building was supposed to be closed, and cleaning up thoroughly afterward. The propane usage had been spread out enough that it didn't trigger any obvious red flags when looking at monthly totals. Marcus was charged with manufacturing methamphetamine, possession with intent to distribute, and several other felonies. His bail was set at $100,000. The story made the local news. "Scottsdale HOA board member arrested in meth lab bust" was the headline. Several reporters called me for comment, but Frank Garrison advised me not to talk to the media until the criminal case was resolved. The HOA held an emergency meeting a week after the arrest. The room was packed again, but this time the mood was different. People were angry and scared. The community center was still closed while the hazmat cleanup continued, and there were questions about potential contamination. Brenda Patterson looked like she had aged 10 years. She opened the meeting by reading a prepared statement about how shocked and betrayed the board felt, how they had no knowledge of Marcus Webb's activities, and how they were cooperating fully with law enforcement. "We will be conducting a full review of our security procedures," Brenda said. "And we will be implementing new policies to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." "How did this happen in the first place?" someone in the crowd shouted. "We're still investigating that," Brenda said. "Who else knew?" another person asked. "Was anyone else involved?" "As far as we know, Marcus acted alone," Brenda said. "The police have not indicated that anyone else was complicit." Rita Kowalski spoke up. "We need to thank Stephen Erikson," she said. "If he hadn't been monitoring the propane usage, this might have continued for months or years. His vigilance may have prevented a disaster." There was some applause which seemed to pain Brenda physically. She looked at me, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something other than hostility in her expression. It might have been embarrassment or maybe resignation. "Yes," Brenda said stiffly. "We appreciate Mr. Erikson's alertness and his cooperation with law enforcement." The meeting continued with discussions about the community center cleanup, estimated costs, and timeline for reopening. The hazmat team had determined that the contamination was limited to the storage room and could be professionally cleaned, but it would cost about $20,000. "Will insurance cover this?" someone asked. "We're working with our insurance company," Brenda said. "But there's a clause about illegal activities that may exclude coverage. So we might have to pay for this ourselves," the same person asked. "It's possible," Brenda said. The mood in the room turned darker. A special assessment to cover Marcus Webb's meth lab cleanup was not something anyone had budgeted for. After the meeting, Leonard and Rita approached me. "We need to talk about the propane monitoring data," Leonard said. "The police have it, but we'd like to review it as well to understand the full scope of what happened." "I can provide that," I said, "but I want to make sure everyone understands that my monitoring system is what caught this." If the HOA had been running the propane system like Brenda wanted, there wouldn't have been any monitoring. This would have continued until something exploded or someone got caught selling meth. "We understand," Rita said, "and I think most of the community understands now too." She was right. Over the next few weeks, my standing in the neighborhood improved dramatically. People who had previously avoided me or given me dirty looks now waved when they saw me. Several neighbors stopped by to thank me personally. One couple brought me a gift basket. The criminal case against Marcus Webb moved forward. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was pushing for significant prison time. The community center cleanup was completed in late November, costing $23,000 that the HOA had to fund through another special assessment. Brenda Patterson announced at the December HOA meeting that she would not be seeking re-election as president. Her term was up in January, and she said she wanted to step back and let someone else lead. Nobody was surprised. Leonard Chen was elected as the new HOA president in January. One of his first actions was to propose a formal commendation for me, recognizing my role in discovering the illegal activity at the community center. The board voted unanimously to approve it. Marcus Webb eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The judge noted in his sentencing that the location of the drug lab in a community building showed a particular disregard for public safety. In February, I got a call from Detective Pritchard. "I wanted to give you an update," she said. "We've been reviewing Marcus Webb's financial records, and it looks like he was selling the meth through various distributors in Phoenix. He made about $200,000 over the 4 months he was operating. Most of it's been recovered and will be subject to asset forfeiture. What about the propane he used? I asked. Can I put in a claim for that? You should be able to, Pritchard said. Talk to the prosecutor's office about restitution. They can include it in the final sentencing order. I did, and eventually received a check for $4,000 to cover the estimated propane usage. It was more than I had expected, but apparently Marcus had been running the burners extensively. As spring arrived, things in Desert Heights finally settled into something resembling normalcy. Leonard Chen was doing a good job as HOA president, focusing on practical issues and avoiding drama. The propane service agreement was working smoothly, with the HOA requesting and paying for special event usage without conflict. I ran into Brenda Patterson one day at the grocery store in Scottsdale. She was in the produce section, examining avocados. We made eye contact, and for a moment I thought she might just walk away. But instead she approached me. "Stephen," she said, "I've been meaning to talk to you." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. "I owe you an apology," Brenda said. "I spent 2 years fighting with you over the propane system, trying to find ways to undermine you or take control. And in the end, your system and your monitoring are what saved this community from something much worse." "I appreciate that," I said. "I was so focused on what I saw as a power struggle that I lost sight of what actually mattered," Brenda said. "Marcus was on the board, he was my friend, and I never suspected what he was doing. But you were paying attention to details that I dismissed as unimportant. You were right, and I was wrong. We had different perspectives on things," I said, trying to be diplomatic. "You were protecting your property rights, and I was treating it like you were the enemy," Brenda said. "I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for the complaints, the special assessments, trying to cancel your supplier account, all of it. It was petty and counterproductive." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I know it wasn't easy." "It wasn't," Brenda admitted, "but I needed to say it." We talked for a few more minutes, just small talk about the neighborhood and how her retirement from the board was going. It was the first normal conversation we had ever had. As I drove home that day, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The spring social confrontation, the emergency meetings, Brenda's attempts to undermine me, Marcus Webb's arrest, all of it. It had been exhausting and frustrating, but in the end, standing my ground had been the right choice. The propane distribution system that I had bought as part of a bankruptcy deal that had seemed like a minor asset at the time had turned out to be more significant than I had imagined. It had been a source of conflict, but also ultimately a tool that helped expose a serious crime. Living in an HOA community would always have its challenges. There would always be rules and regulations, board members with agendas, neighbors with complaints. But I had learned that it was possible to stand up for your rights without being unreasonable, to push back against overreach without being hostile, and to find resolution even in seemingly impossible conflicts. Leonard Chen called me later that week. "I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "We're going to be requesting propane for a community barbecue in April. We'll follow the proper procedure and give you plenty of notice." "Sounds good," I said. "Send me the details and I'll get you a quote." "Also," Leonard said, "we've been talking about adding a permanent propane monitoring display in the community center, showing real-time usage data. It would help us manage our consumption better, and it would serve as a reminder about the importance of oversight." "Would you be willing to work with us on that?" "Absolutely," I said. "I think that's a great idea." "Thanks," Leonard said. And Stephen, I know the past couple years have been rocky, but I want you to know that the board appreciates what you do. The propane system is an asset to this community, and so are you. After hanging up, I walked out to my garage and looked at the monitoring panel, the same panel where I had first noticed the unusual spike that day in October. The gauges showed normal pressure, steady flow to the community center for their water heaters and range, nothing unusual. It was just a propane system, pipes and valves and storage tanks. But it had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that property rights matter, that oversight matters, that paying attention to details matters. I thought about Marcus Webb, sitting in prison, his life destroyed by his own choices. I thought about Brenda Patterson, learning humility after years of unchecked authority. I thought about the Desert Heights community, recovering from a scandal and moving forward. And I thought about myself, a homeowner who had bought into an HOA community not knowing what challenges lay ahead, who had stood up for his rights when it would have been easier to back down, and who had ultimately helped protect his neighbors from a threat they didn't even know existed. The sun was setting over the Scottsdale hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Down the road, I could see the community center, its windows lit up for an evening yoga class. Life was going on, ordinary and peaceful. I closed the garage door and went inside to make dinner, my phone showing the steady, predictable flow of propane through the system I owned and managed, serving the community I lived in, 1 cubic foot at a time. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Frank Erikson. The subject line read, "Final thoughts on the HOA matter." Inside, he had written a brief note congratulating me on how things had turned out and offering some advice for the future. "Stephen, you handled a difficult situation with patience and principle," Frank wrote. "You didn't back down when pressured, but you also didn't escalate unnecessarily. That's the right balance. My advice going forward is to maintain good documentation. Stay professional in all your dealings with the HOA, and remember that most conflicts can be resolved if both parties are willing to follow the agreements they've made. You've set a good precedent for how to deal with HOA overreach, and I suspect other homeowners in your community will benefit from the example you've set." I appreciated Frank's perspective. The legal fees had been significant, several $1,000s over the course of the conflict, but having professional guidance had been worth it. I had avoided making mistakes that could have undermined my position or exposed me to liability. Later that day, I drove into Phoenix to meet with Tom Reed from Arizona Propane Solutions. He wanted to discuss some system upgrades that would improve efficiency and add additional monitoring capabilities. We met at his office, a small building in an industrial park near Sky Harbor Airport. Tom had the plans spread out on a conference table when I arrived. "I've been thinking about your situation," Tom said. "The monitoring system you have is good, but we could make it even better. What if we added zone-level metering, so you could see not just total usage but usage broken down by different areas of the community center?" "That would have helped identify the meth lab sooner," I said. "Exactly," Tom said. "If you had seen that the storage room was using propane at odd hours, that would have been an immediate red flag." We discussed the technical details and the costs. The upgrade would run about $8,000, but it would give me much more granular control and visibility. I decided to move forward with it. "One other thing," Tom said. "Have you thought about what happens if the HOA continues to grow, if they build more facilities or if more homes connect to your system?" "The easement agreement covers up to 12 homes," I said. "Right now it's just my house and the community center." "But what if those other lots get developed?" Tom asked. You could be running a real utility operation. You might need to think about incorporating as a proper utility company, getting licensed, all of that. It was a good point. The Desert Heights development had stalled after the bankruptcy, but there were still undeveloped lots that could potentially be built out. If that happened, I could find myself managing a much larger operation than I currently was. Let me think about it, I said. Right now, I'm happy just managing my own property and the community center. But you're right, I should plan for potential growth. As I drove back to Scottsdale, I thought about what Tom had said. The propane system had started as a side benefit of buying my property, something that gave me independence and a little extra income from the HOA. It had become a source of conflict, then a tool for uncovering crime, and now it was potentially the foundation for a small business. Life had a way of taking unexpected turns. Back at home, I spent the evening updating my records and reviewing the monitoring data from the past few months. Everything looked normal, steady usage patterns that matched the HOA's activities. The community center was hosting a book club meeting tonight, which meant lights and heating but no unusual propane consumption. I made myself dinner and sat on my back patio, looking out over the desert landscape. The sun was setting again, that brief period of perfect temperature before the night cold set in. I could see a coyote moving along the ridge line in the distance, hunting for rabbits or mice. This was why I had moved to Arizona, for the space and the freedom and the natural beauty. The HOA drama had been an unwelcome complication, but it hadn't destroyed the fundamental appeal of living here. If anything, resolving the conflict had made me appreciate what I had even more. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jennifer Larkin, the neighbor who had called to warn me about Brenda's door-to-door campaign months ago. "Hey, Stephen, just wanted to let you know that a bunch of us neighbors are getting together for a potluck next Saturday. Would love to have you there if you're free. It's at our place, 6 p.m. I texted back that I would be there. It was nice to feel like part of the community rather than an outsider fighting with the HOA. The rest of the week passed quietly. I worked my regular job, managing software systems for a healthcare company, taking advantage of the remote work flexibility to live in Scottsdale rather than being tied to a major city. In the evenings, I monitored the propane system, maintained my property, and enjoyed the peaceful desert environment. Saturday arrived, and I drove over to Jennifer and Mark Larkin's house with a pasta salad I had made. Their place was about a mile from mine, a smaller lot but nicely maintained with desert landscaping and a pool. There were maybe 15 people there when I arrived, neighbors I recognized but hadn't really spent much time with. The mood was relaxed and friendly. People were curious about the propane system and asked questions about how it worked. I explained the basics without getting too technical. Mark Larkin, who worked as an engineer for Intel, was particularly interested. "So you basically run a private utility company," he said. "That's pretty cool. How much maintenance does it require?" "Not too much," I said. "The system is pretty automated. I do quarterly inspections of the lines and valves, and I monitor the usage data daily. The biggest task is coordinating with Southwest Gas for refills, but that's just scheduling." "And the HOA pays you for what they use?" someone else asked. "Yeah, there's a metered rate based on consumption," I said. "Plus the new agreement allows them to request additional capacity for events with advance notice." "That seems fair," Jennifer said. I never understood why Brenda made such a big deal about it. "I think she saw it as a control issue," I said. "She wanted the HOA to manage everything in the community, and having a private system outside her authority bothered her." "Well, I'm glad you stood your ground," Mark said. "And I'm glad you caught what Marcus was doing. That could have been really dangerous. We talked about the meth lab briefly, but nobody wanted to dwell on it. The conversation moved on to other topics. The upcoming summer heat, landscaping challenges, the best restaurants in Scottsdale, normal neighborly stuff. I left around 9, feeling good about the evening. It was nice to have normal social interactions with neighbors, without the tension of HOA conflict hanging over everything. Sunday morning, I was checking the propane monitoring system when I noticed something odd. There was a message in the system log that I hadn't seen before. It indicated that there had been a pressure fluctuation in the main line the previous night around 2 in the morning. The fluctuation was small, nothing that would have affected service, but it was unusual. I pulled up the detailed data and saw that pressure had dropped by about 5% for approximately 15 minutes, then returned to normal. It could have been nothing, just a sensor glitch or a brief issue with the main tank pressure. But after everything that had happened with Marcus Webb, I had learned to pay attention to anomalies. I decided to do a physical inspection of the system. I started with the main tanks in my garage, checking all the connections and valves. Everything looked fine. Then I followed the distribution line from my property down toward the community center. The line ran underground for most of the distance, but there were access points every few hundred feet where I could check pressure and look for leaks. I worked my way along the route, checking each point systematically. At the third access point, about halfway between my house and the community center, I found something wrong. The access cover had been disturbed recently. I could tell because there was fresh dirt around the edges that didn't match the settled soil everywhere else. I opened the cover and looked inside. Someone had installed a small bypass valve on the main line, with a flexible hose connection leading off to the side. The valve was currently closed, but it had clearly been used recently based on the propane residue around the connection. Someone was tapping into my propane line. Again. I took photos of everything, then called Detective Pritchard. She might be done with the Marcus Webb case, but this was clearly related. Someone in the community had learned from Marcus's mistake and was trying to steal propane without triggering the obvious usage spikes that had gotten him caught. Pritchard answered on the third ring. "Mr. Erikson, what can I do for you?" I explained what I had found. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can you send me those photos?" I sent them from my phone while we were still talking. "Do you think this is related to the Webb case?" I asked. "It's possible," Pritchard said. "Or it could be someone else who knows about the propane system and saw an opportunity. That bypass valve is pretty sophisticated. Whoever installed it knows what they're doing." "What should I do?" I asked. "Leave everything as it is," Pritchard said. "I'm going to send a crime scene tech out to document it and dust for prints. And I'm going to set up surveillance on that access point. If someone comes back to use the bypass, we'll catch them." Within an hour, a police technician arrived and processed the scene. He took detailed photos, collected the bypass valve as evidence, and sealed the access point with police tape. Detective Pritchard showed up shortly after. "This is getting complicated," she said. "I'm going to need to interview everyone who had knowledge of the Marcus Webb operation. That includes you, the HOA board members, anyone who would have seen the police reports or the monitoring data." "You think it's someone from the community?" I asked. "I think it's someone who knew exactly where your propane line runs and how to access it without being detected," Pritchard said. "That's not random. That's someone with inside knowledge." Over the next few days, police interviewed most of the HOA board and several neighbors who had been involved in discussions about the propane system. I didn't hear any details about what they learned, but the investigation was clearly active. Then, on Thursday afternoon, Detective Pritchard called me with an update. "We got him," she said. It was Patricia Morrison's husband, Glenn. He's a plumber by trade, which explains how he knew to install the bypass valve. We caught him on surveillance camera returning to the access point last night. What was he doing with the propane? I asked. Apparently, he's been running a mobile welding business on the side, Pritchard said. He was using your propane for his torches instead of buying his own tanks. We estimate he stole about 20 gallons over the past month. That's what this was all about, I said. Welding? People steal for all kinds of reasons, Pritchard said. Most of them are pretty mundane. Glenn Morrison didn't want to pay for propane. He knew where your line was because of the HOA discussions, and he saw an opportunity. He's being charged with theft of utilities and vandalism of utility infrastructure. Patricia Morrison resigned from the HOA board the next day. A brief email to Leonard Chen saying that family circumstances made it impossible for her to continue serving. Leonard called me to explain what had happened and to apologize on behalf of the board. I feel like we've become the crime capital of Scottsdale, Leonard said. First Marcus with the meth lab, now Patricia's husband stealing propane. What's next? Hopefully nothing, I said. But I'm going to upgrade my security on those access points. I'm thinking motion sensors and cameras on the main distribution line. That's probably smart, Leonard said. And the HOA will pay for half of it. It's in everyone's interest to protect the system. I appreciated the offer. Tom Reed came out the following week, and we designed a comprehensive security upgrade that included cameras at each access point, motion sensors, and improved locking mechanisms on the covers. The total cost was $12,000, which the HOA agreed to split with me. The work was completed by the end of May. I now had real-time video monitoring of every access point on the distribution line, with alerts sent to my phone if any unusual activity was detected. Glenn Morrison pleaded guilty to the theft charges and was sentenced to 6 months in jail and ordered to pay restitution of $2,000, which included the estimated value of the stolen propane and the cost of repairing the access point he had damaged. By June, things had finally stabilized again. The community center was operating normally, the HOA was functioning well under Leonard Chen's leadership, and my propane system was secure and monitored comprehensively. I received a formal letter from the HOA thanking me for my patience and cooperation over the past year, and recognizing my contribution to community safety. It was signed by all 4 current board members: Leonard Chen, Rita Kowalski, Bill Samuelson, who had replaced Marcus Webb, and Diane Torres, who had replaced Patricia Morrison. Summer arrived with temperatures climbing into the hundreds, typical for Scottsdale in July. My propane usage actually decreased during the hottest months because I wasn't running my fireplace or heating system. The community center's usage also dropped, just the water heaters and range for occasional events. I spent a lot of time on my back patio in the early mornings and late evenings when it was cool enough to be outside. The desert had its own beauty in summer, harsh and unforgiving but spectacular in its way. One evening in late July, I got a call from Frank Garrison. "I wanted to check in with you," he said. "It's been a few months since we talked. How are things going with the HOA?" "Good, actually," I said. "Leonard Chen is doing a great job as president. We haven't had any conflicts. The propane system is working smoothly." "I'm glad to hear it," Frank said. "You know, your case would make a great example for other homeowners dealing with HOA disputes. Would you be interested in writing up your experience? I have a colleague who publishes a newsletter about property rights issues." "Maybe," I said. "Let me think about it." After hanging up, I considered Frank's suggestion. My experience with the Desert Heights HOA had been exhausting and occasionally frightening, but it had also been educational. I had learned about property rights, utility law, HOA governance, and the importance of standing up for yourself when someone tried to overstep their authority. If sharing that experience could help other homeowners navigate similar situations, maybe it was worth doing. I spent the next few weeks writing up a detailed account of everything that had happened, from the spring social confrontation through the resolution of the Glenn Morrison theft case. It ended up being about 20 pages, which I sent to Frank for review. He loved it. His colleague published it in the September issue of the Property Rights Advocate newsletter, and I started getting emails from people around the country who were dealing with their own HOA disputes. Most of the emails were just thank you notes from people who felt validated in their own struggles. A few asked for specific advice, which I tried to provide based on my experience. One email was from a guy in Florida who was in almost the exact same situation, owning a private water system that the HOA wanted to take over. I referred him to Frank Garrison, and they ended up working together to resolve his case. It felt good to turn my negative experience into something useful for others. As autumn arrived and the temperatures in Scottsdale became pleasant again, I reflected on how much had changed in the past 18 months. I had gone from being a relative outsider in the Desert Heights community to being someone people knew and respected. I had stood up to an overreaching HOA president and won. I had helped expose 2 different crimes, and I had established a system for managing my propane distribution that served both my interests and the community's needs. The HOA requested propane for their fall festival in October, following all the proper procedures. I provided a quote, they approved it, and the event went off without any issues. People stopped by my booth at the festival to chat and thank me again for everything I had done. Brenda Patterson was there too, volunteering at the food table. We made eye contact across the lawn and she gave me a small nod. No smile, but no hostility either. Just acknowledgement that we were both part of this community and had to coexist. That evening, after the festival ended and everyone had gone home, I drove up to my house and sat in my garage looking at the propane monitoring panel. The gauges showed that the system had successfully handled the increased demand of the festival, then settled back to normal levels. Everything was working exactly as it should. I thought about all the things that could have gone wrong over the past year and a half. Brenda could have found a way to take over the propane system. Marcus Webb's meth lab could have exploded. Glenn Morrison could have caused a leak that resulted in a fire. Any number of disasters could have occurred, but they hadn't. Because I had paid attention, kept good records, stood my ground when necessary, and worked with reasonable people when possible. The propane system that I had acquired almost by accident had become a significant part of my life and my identity in this community. It had been a source of conflict, but also ultimately a tool for building something positive. I closed up the garage and went inside, my phone showing the steady flow of propane through the lines I owned, serving the community I lived in, monitored and maintained and protected. Everything was as it should be, and tomorrow would bring another day of desert sunshine and peaceful living in Scottsdale, Arizona. The story of my conflict with the Desert Heights HOA was over, resolved through patience and principle and a willingness to stand up for what was right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready for them, secure in the knowledge that property rights matter, oversight matters, and sometimes the best defense against overreach is simply refusing to back down.